If you look at a map of Middle-earth, you'll see that the far east of the map is dominated by a single, imposing geographical feature. It's also quite lonely, with nothing around it being named, no cities, no towns. This could lead one to believe that this place is unimportant, just there for decoration. But in actuality, this place was very important to the development of elves and men, and because of its role in history throughout the ages. In this video, we talk about the Sea of Rhun, the edge of the known world. Okay, so the Sea of Rhun, sometimes referred to as Runea, is very difficult to miss. It's large and there's not really much around it. To the north, east, west and south, there's seemingly just vast empty plains. The sea itself is accompanied by some interesting geographical features. In the southeastern corner of the sea is an unnamed island. To the southwest of the sea is a range of unnamed hills or mountains, and to the northeast of the sea is a large unnamed forest. On earlier versions of the map, this forest was named Neldereth, sharing a name with one of the forests of Doriath, which has led to speculation that the forest may have been home to a tribe of Avaran elves, but we know pretty much nothing about these places. For a long time, it was believed that the Sea of Rune was a remnant of the Sea of Helkar, the giant inland sea that had the Bay of Cuiviénen along its shores, the awakening place of the Elves. However, Tolkien's later writings suggested that the Sea of Rune and the Sea of Helkar existed at the same time, as when the Elves left Cuiviénen, they travelled along the shores of the Sea of Helkar and then reached the Sea of Rune. However, this might also mean that the Sea of Helkar was rapidly shrinking, and that the Sea of Rune was just the western part of the sea that had already separated from the rest. When the Elves reached the eastern shores of the Sea of Rune, they decided to stay put for about 130 years, because it's described as then a very pleasant place, which might imply that it became less pleasant in later years. During this time, the Elves have plenty of children and allow them time to grow. Meanwhile, other Elves use this time to work on their practical skills. The Teleri improve their shipbuilding and sailing skills. However, this should not be mistaken as the Sea of Rune being calm and easy to sail. We're told in the unfinished tales that dark winds laden with rain could pass over the sea. After those years passed, the Elves marched around the Sea of Rune and ended up briefly camping just inland from the western shore, in a place that would later become known as Dorwinion. These lands are perfect for growing grains and other food, so Orome teaches them the how. The Elves were not the only ones to briefly stop by the Sea of Rune on their journey westwards. Upon reaching the northern shore of the sea, a large group of men, the ancestors of the Edain, encountered dwarves, possibly those who dwelt in the nearby Iron Hills, or those who were travelling between these lands and Oricani. There, the Edain's language, Taliska, would be influenced by Kuzdal. Shortly afterwards, a smaller group of Edain would split off and settle in the hills on the southwestern side of the Sea of Rune. This was the origin of the House of Beor, while the larger group that remained would become known as the House of Hador. Both groups would also build boats and sail the sea, but they would encounter each other little and their languages would begin to diverge. After a while, parts of both groups would continue moving west, but a large number of the Pre-Hadorians would remain and would eventually become known as the Northmen. For a long time, the Sea of Rune disappears from the history pages. It was of little interest to the Elves in the west, and Númenórean influence was largely confined to the coastal lands. But we do know that much of Sauron's attention was focused on the east, specifically in bringing the men who lived there into his service. Many of these men would pass through the gap between the Sea of Rune and Mordor, which was something akin to a steppe highway, and they would move west and clash with the Northmen who dwelt in the plains, valleys and forests of Rhovanion. Unfortunately, during these years we have pretty much zero knowledge of those who dwelt around the shores of the Sea of Rune. But in the Third Age, this changes. In 490, Easterlings invaded Gondor but were defeated by King Tarostar, who took the name Romendikil I, meaning East Victor. But his victory was short-lived, for in 541 the Easterlings attacked again and he was killed in the fighting. His son, Turambar, realised that defending against the Easterlings was not enough. They needed to be stopped at the source. So Gondorian forces marched to the Sea of Rune and defeated the Easterlings there. Gondor annexed these territories up to the Sea of Rune, although in reality there was no real Gondorian settlement here. Instead, the land acted as a buffer zone and allowed the Northmen nearby to recover their strength. This was not the only time the Gondorians marched to the Sea of Rune. Around the early 13th century, the Easterlings began to creep back west of the sea, perhaps owing to Gondor's recent focus on the south and the decadence of its last few kings. The Easterlings were beginning to cause problems with the Northmen, so Minilcar, the regent of Gondor, marched east with an army. He defeated an army of Easterlings to the west of the sea, and then even marched beyond the sea to burn the Easterling camps there. He would then take the name Remendikil II. Tolkien describing the Easterlings as living in camps may tell us that there weren't really proper settlements around the Sea of Rune at this time, at least no large cities. This may seem a little odd given that the lands around the Sea of Rune were previously described as pleasant, and at least on the western side were described as fertile. It certainly couldn't have been a lifeless place given that there was a large forest around it. If I had to guess, I don't think urban settlements would have been impossible along the sea, far from it. Instead, I would say that the reason the lands didn't see widespread settlement is because of the more nomadic nature of the Easterlings. Remendikil's march was the last time Gondor went that far east. The Great Plague of the 17th century eroded Gondor's strength, and the Wainrider invasion of 1856 saw a combined Gondorian Northman army get smashed at the Battle of the Plains. Gondor relinquished its lands east of the Anduin, and the area around the Sea of Rune became hostile territory for the next century. While the Wainriders that Gondor encountered ended up settling in Dorwinion, the lands beyond became the domain of the Eastern Wainriders, who continued to wage wars against their other neighbours to the south. This domination was relatively short-lived. In 1944, the Wainriders disintegrated following the Battle of the Camp. Although Gondor didn't reclaim their lost territories, the land was at least no longer off-limits. We know this because in the late 20th century, Verondil, the future steward of Gondor, hunted wild oxen along the shores of the Sea of Rune. From one of these oxen, he fashioned a horn which would later be passed down as an heirloom to the eldest son in the line of stewards. This is the famous Horn of Gondor that Boromir uses while part of the Fellowship of the Ring. For the rest of the Third Age, the Sea of Rune would largely be out of the purview of the West. At this time, it was solidly Easterling territory, and the plains between Mordor and the sea would remain a highway for invaders and migrating groups. That said, there was still more to the Sea of Rune than warlike Easterlings who served Sauron, because on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Rune was a land known as Dorwinion. I've done a full video on Dorwinion before, so I won't get into the theory crafting side of things. We don't know the history of Dorwinion, except that it definitely existed in the late Third Age as a wine-producing region that traded with the men of Lake Town and the Elves of the Woodland Realm. We also don't know who dwelt in Dorwinion. It could have been Northmen, akin to the men of Dale, or a peaceful mercantile group of Easterlings. But given the fact that Dorwinion had a Sindarin name, it could have been a former Gondorian province inhabited by the descendants of those who remained behind after Gondor abandoned the eastern lands. Alternatively, Dorwinion may have also been home to elves, of either Sindarin or Avari origin. Regardless of the origins of Dorwinion or who lived there, the fact that their goods made their way upriver might also mean that they made it out into the Sea of Rune. There could have been merchant ships crisscrossing the sea, landing at ports on the far side. Earlier, I talked about how the Sea of Rune seemingly didn't have any real settlements beyond the fortified camps of the Easterlings, but this may have changed thousands of years later, because if there's one thing that encourages the founding of towns, it's definitely trade. Perhaps at the end of the Third Age, the land around the Sea of Rune wasn't just the haunt of nomadic barbarians anymore, but was actually seeing some proper settlement. Unfortunately, we just don't know. One thing we do know is that in the Fourth Age, Gondorian forces once again looked upon the shores of the distant sea. We're told that Aragorn led campaigns beyond the Sea of Rune and that he was joined by the thundering cavalry of Rohan, led by King Eomer. This tells us that even after Sauron's defeat, the Easterlings were still causing some problems, requiring Aragorn to set forth and deal with them, just as Remendikil I and II had done thousands of years before. Whether Gondor conquered the lands up to the Sea of Rune again is anyone's guess. At the very least, I imagine they pacified these places, maybe by burning more Easterling camps. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found that interesting. The Sea of Rune is an interesting place because, I don't know, the way it looks, where it is, it just screams the kind of place where you could world build a massive empire or something. Instead, it's actually kind of the opposite in Tolkien's world. Oh well. Cheers, farewell, and remember, fun fact, we actually have our own version of the Shrinking Sea of Helcar. It's called the Aral Sea, and it's one of the biggest environmental disasters of all time. Okay, that's not really a fun fact.